This is the new Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master lens. I'm just kidding. This is actually the Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master lens. I'm a grade A piece of trash YouTuber, so Sony doesn't send me stuff like this to review, but I do purchase my own GM lenses. I'm filming with a 24 G Master. I have a 35 G Master here and a 50 G Master here. I also own a 135 G Master in my case. A bit of a flex, but not really. And of course, the only reason why I'm doing this video is for the YouTube algorithm. As you can see on your YouTube recommended videos, your subscriptions, you noticed that the new Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master was released today for I think $1,200 to $1,300, because obviously every single tube doucher on this planet, except for me and a select few other guys, had the opportunity to review the lens ahead of time, and they posted a video. Can't blame them. I would probably do the same thing if I was sent such items from Sony. But regardless, for some odd reason, I know there are many of you who subscribe to my channel who probably want to know my opinion on the Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master lens, knowing that I obviously own a shit ton of random Sony lenses from various manufacturers. As you can see, I do have the 50mm GM here. So what is my opinion on the new 50mm f1.4 GM? I think it's a fantastic lens. Obviously, just looking at the YouTube videos like everyone else has, the 50mm f1.4 GM is a fantastic performer. I'm actually astounded by how good Sony is as a lens manufacturer, as they've never really been known as like a great lens manufacturer. And they have clearly just completely surpassed Sigma in every way or form in terms of producing lenses. And Sigma does nothing but make lenses. And largely, they've also surpassed Canon as the 50mm GM 1.2. If you watch a bunch of comparisons with the 50mm f1.2 GM versus the Canon RF 50mm f1.2, the GM is just an overall better performer, clinically speaking, in terms of not just like the design, the weight, the size, but bokeh, the chromatic aberration, the sharpness across the frame, etc. Sony is the overall performer. And yes, I am a Sony fanboy douchebag. I get it. Everyone gets it. I own a bunch of Sony stuff, but I'm just telling you what I've seen. I'm just regurgitating information that I've researched, YouTube videos that I've watched, etc. Don't shoot the messenger. So when the 50mm f1.2 GM was announced, I think last year or a year and a half ago, I was kind of critical of it. I said Sony should have tried to make something smaller, something more affordable, maybe like a 50mm f1.4 G Master and around the same size as a 35 and a 24 G Master. And that's exactly what they did, pretty much. A little bit too late, in my opinion, but that is exactly what they did. They made an affordable G Master lens at f1.4 that is relatively the same size as a 24 and a 35, almost the same weight. It's a little bit more fat. It's pretty much if the 24 or 35mm GM had one too many egg rolls over Chinese New Year and gained some weight, which is fine. I'm not here to body shame, but if you are kind of over it, you should probably lift some weights, eat a little bit less. It will be very good for you, you know, beyond just, you know, your looks and things of that nature. But I'm gonna stop talking about that now because everyone on the planet these days is Sony a7S III ISO sensitive in terms of their feelings. So let's get back to the topic at hand, which is the 50mm f1.4 GM. And, you know, again, I don't have the dang lens. I've just been watching other tube douchers, and what I've noticed time and time again is that the 50mm f1.4 is as sharp as the 50mm f1.2 at f1.2, which means when you're shooting the 50mm G Master f1.4 wide open at f1.4, it is the same sharpness as the 50mm GM f1.2 at 1.2, which is an amazing feat for the GM 1.2 because obviously, you know, 1.2 is super sharp, which means if you're like me who own this GM 1.2, I shoot the f1.2 G Master at f1.4 most of the time. It just means that it's even sharper. So The f1.2 G Master is clearly the superior lens. There's no doubt about it. That's why it's $2,000. It has more autofocus shit. It has more autofocus shitteration inside. It has a bunch of other crap that makes it more expensive. And you know, the question you would have for yourself is it, you know, $700-800 more expensive? Is it worth, you know, $700 to $800 more than the 50mm f1.4 GM? I think for most of us, it is not. You know, this is coming from someone who owns f1.2, and I'm not going to buy the f1.4. I'm not going to sell this to get the 1.4. I'm just telling you that I don't think the majority of us need an f1.2, or you know, even like the sharpness and all that stuff, especially if you're a videographer, filmmaker. Maybe I see photographers going for something like this, but for a videographer, a primary videographer, the 50mm f1.4 is enough. And a lot of us sit here and we'll put mist filters on our lenses. We do things to make them less clinical, less perfect, less sharp. And I do the same with my 50mm f1.2. We just want a certain look when it comes to filmmaking. And you know, if I didn't have a 50mm GM 1.2 today, I would probably buy the Sony 50mm f1.4. You know, just because I value smaller size, I value lightweight, things of that nature, especially with bodies like the Sony FX3, A7 IV, A7R5, A7S3, A7, Sony A1. That is kind of my answer to that. Like, if you don't have a Sony G Master 50 yet, and you're looking into buying it, you should just go for the 50mm f1.4. And I do understand the Sigma, you know, the 50mm f1.4 DGDN. DN stands for D's nuts, obviously. If you have been looking at that, because I think that's like $700 or $800, it's actually significantly cheaper than the GM version, but the GM just outperforms the Sigma DGDN in many ways. But again, just based on me watching YouTube reviews, that I think is probably worth the $500-600 difference, you know, in just the size alone, you know, size alone, and the overall performance, sharpness, autofocus, all that stuff that the GM 50mm f1.4 has to offer. But as a Sony fanboy D-bag consumer, I think Sony was a little bit late on this 50 f1.4. They should have released it earlier. They should have released it when they released f1.2, because it would have been made more sense. But I think Sony was trying to show off their massive lens making testicles, you know, and compete with the Canon RF lens. They had to make this f1.2, and it's fine. I've been very happy with this f1.2. Most of my video reel for 2022 was filmed with the Sony f1.2, so this is definitely like my go-to like professional lens that I use on professional shoots. But I don't really like using it for travel. I don't like using it for walking around with family and stuff like that, because it's just big and it's hefty. Then the basic question is like, do you need to have a 50 f1.4? Do you need to spend, you know, $1,200-1,300 on a 50mm lens? And it all depends on what you do. I think if you are a professional photographer and you like working in the 50mm range, and you want a fantastic 50mm for photography, yes, go for the 50mm GM f1.4. And I think that's really all you would need. You don't have to go up to an f1.2 GM. Now, if you're a filmmaker, do you need to get a 50mm f1.4 GM at $1,200-1,300? One on the Sony system. You do have other options out there. You have, again, the 60mm, the 50mm Sigma. But again, the 50mm Sigma is around $800. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think, if I was in that budget range of $800, I would probably lean just put in a little bit extra money and get the GM. That is just me, just based on like what I've seen. Now, what about the really, really, really budget 50s, such as the Samyang 45mm f1.8? Now, look at the size difference, weight difference, price difference. This lens is like $200-300, and you could buy one used for like $180-200 or something like that, which is what I did here. And this little lens is actually this little lens here is fantastic for its size and the fact that it is dirt cheap, and the size, the weight, everything just makes it very fun to use. It is obviously not as clinically amazing as the G Master, but it does have some qualities that make it cool for filmmakers. Obviously, you could use this for photography too, and to be quite honest, you may or may not even tell the difference between this lens and a Sony GM when you take pictures with it. But for videographers, filmmakers, like you will appreciate the type of look you get out of a lens like this. And I think this is where Sony should have gone with this in mind. Sony, because they already released the 50mm f1.2 before as a G Master lens, they should have tried to update their 50mm f1.8 lens and provide one cheap. When I'm saying cheap, I'm talking about under $300. Canon RF has a 50mm f1.8 under $300. Sony should have tried doing something like that. And I think most people would have very well appreciated having a 50mm f1.8 that is small in size and that performance well, because the current 50mm f1.8 Sony is kind of trash when it comes to autofocusing. It has the autofocus motor that makes a lot of noise, and it's an ancient lens. So they should have updated that. And if they wanted to do a 50mm f1.4, they should have done that before they released the f1.2 G Master. That is just my opinion. But beyond that, I think Sony should start focusing on making more creative focal length lenses. I know they recently released the 20mm to 70 f4, but for the love of God, it is f4. I don't want anything to do with that. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of us don't. I think they need to take advantage of what they're able to do and possibly give us some more creative focal lengths with better apertures, like 24 to 50 f2. I don't know, 18 to 50 f2. A nice usable zoom range that is f2, or 30 to 50 f1.8. It seems very little, but I would so greatly appreciate to be able to go from like a 35 to a 50 and still have a nice bright aperture for filmmaking and photography. I think all of you would greatly appreciate it, and I think and I think those lenses would probably sell like hotcakes. But apparently Sony doesn't think that. Just think outside the box in terms of focal lengths and aperture ranges, because all we have is most lenses we have are all f2.8 zooms. Maybe they feel like it'll eat into sales with their prime lenses. I don't know. Maybe they make really good lenses. Maybe they make very good money off of prime lenses. I don't know. I just wish they got a little more creative on that end, because right now every camera body these days are fantastic. Canon, Sony, Panasonic, Nikon, etc. They all have great autofocus. They all have great image quality. 10-bit 422 for videography. 4K 60p 120p. The only real thing that separates these camera bodies now are the lenses, and right now Sony does have the lead in terms of E-mount lenses, because they're open to third-party lenses, unlike Canon RF. Nikon and Panasonic don't have that many options. Sony, as a lens manufacturer, should try to get more creative and give us more options in terms of like zoom ranges and apertures, because we already have plenty of options for prime, things of that nature, and just standard like 24-70s and stuff. So that is my take on the new Sony 50mm GM f1.4. Hopefully it helped you make a purchase decision on whether or not you want to buy one or not. Again, if you don't have a 50mm and you're dead set on getting a G Master, you should just get the 50mm f1.4. It is going to fit all your needs. Save your $800 and do something else with it. If you already have your 50mm f1.2 GM, rest assured you have like one of the greatest lens on the planet. Even though it's probably like only like this much better, even though it may not be worth $800 more than f1.4, you already have it. And if you try to resell it just to get a 50mm f1.4, you're probably gonna lose a bunch of money. And so just rest assured that you have one of the greatest Sony E-mount lenses on earth, and that you're going to get even sharper image quality when you stop down to f1.4 on your G Master f1.2. But if you don't have $1,200 for f1.4 G Master, I would highly recommend something like a Samyang 45 f1.8 to mess around with, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. As always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, lighten up your wallet by clicking the links in the description below. Peace out.
Hey man, that the new Sony 50GM f1.4?
Nah man, this is my 50GM f1.2. Just kind of curious if it's worth the buy compared to the f1.4.
Oh my god, you're a twat. If you want to be the best, if you want to be professional YouTuber, you need to buy the Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master.
Why is that?
Because if you pixel peep, if you make the review, you get sponsored by Skillshare, and maybe you sell t-shirt.
I ain't got the time or $1,300 laying around to do that.
Let me show you. It's so sharp, the bokeh so smooth. Link in the description below to buy.
You're gonna buy a $1,300 lens to film and take photos of tree branches?
Cinematic tree branch filmmaking masterclass on sale, only $29.99.